Hello. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the poetry of Kateri Akiwenzie-Damm, whom I'm reading out of Native Poetry in Canada. So Akiwenzie-Damm is a Anishinaabe poet, and a lot of her work is performance poetry, and so it's very interested in the sound of language, as opposed to primarily approaching poetry as something to be put on the page, right? Because a lot of poets today in our much more sort of book-centric culture poets are often more likely to approach poetry as an act of writing for a reading audience as opposed to a listening audience. And so performance poets, sound-based poets, tend to put a lot more emphasis on the sound of language. And Akiwenzie-Damm is in this tradition. So the first poem that I'm going to read to you has this sort of performance poetry sound approach. It's called Stray Bullets, Oka Revision. It's also about sort of dispossession, right? So we see this in a lot of Indigenous poetry, this sort of sense of loss, of deprivation, of the struggles of Indigenous people, particularly Indigenous women, within settler, colonialist, capitalist, and patriarchal societies. So anyway, Stray Bullets, Oka Revision. My touch is a history book full of lies and half-forgotten truths, written by others who hold the pens and power. My heart is a stray bullet ricocheting in an empty room. My head was sold for the first shiny trinket offered. My beliefs were bought cheap, like magic potions at a traveling road show, with promises everyone wants to believe, but only a fool invests in. My name was stolen by bandits in black robes. My world was taken for a putting green. So, again, I'm not really a sound person, right? That's not really my forte in terms of literary analysis, etc., etc. But this sort of sense of dispossession, right? This sense of having been deprived of one's sort of collective inheritance, right? Of sort of like the foundations of one's identity, particularly as an Indigenous person, right? This sort of sense of having been bought for trinkets, of one's world being taken for a putting green, these sorts of images, these sort of ideas of like, the legal and capitalistic colonialist systems of depriving Indigenous people of their sort of spaces and existence in the world, these become the sort of centerpiece of this experience within the poem. And yet there are these sort of antidotes, these sort of antidotes to this sense of deprivation, and those are rooted in things like memory, right? Personal memory, but also collective memory, generational memory, communal memory, which is often preserved through myth, through the sort of structures, the ethos and ethical structures of Indigenous communities, etc., etc. So a lot of Akiwenzie-Damm's poetry deals with these elements, right? These sort of bits and pieces of structures that preserve identity and memory and culture. So the next couple that I'm going to read you, well, one of them I'm not going to read it. I'll talk a little bit about it. But I am going to read a couple more. So I'm not going to read you Poem Without End number 3, even though I think it's quite good. But it's a little bit lengthy, and I'm concerned about how long the video is going to end up going. But Poem Without End number 3 is about Nanabush. And for the Anishinaabe, particularly the Cree, I think, Nanabush is a central cultural figure within their mythology. Nanabush is a sort of shape-shifting trickster figure who plays a wide variety of roles in different myths, different stories. Often, I think, sort of picking up on the part of the powerless to satirize the powerful. And that's really what happens in Poem Without End number 3, right? So Nanabush takes on the role of these different figures of settler colonial capitalism, of knowledge and institutions of knowledge, etc., etc., and sort of becomes and sort of vacillates between these figures of authority that Nanabush parodies and these sort of figures of rebellion that more align with Nanabush's own ethos as a trickster figure. But I'm gonna read you one that deals directly with the sort of intertwining of personal and generational memory, which I think is a really important component here. So it's called My Grandmothers. Anna, Irene, there are so many memories shaping your words. My image of you, my love for you, my history of us are a lifeline. In Toronto, I remember eating the chocolate bars that marked every visit and shopping in Eaton's bargain basement, trying to keep up. I cling to you, like I would cling to your warm hands. And I remember you, telling the butcher on Eglinton, I was your grandmother, when I was a child walking with you to church, and how straight and smiling you stood, and how shy and secretly proud I was. I remember being with you in your bachelor apartment on Bloor Street, when I first realized I was woman, and you had a way of speaking, I remember, so words would hook in my brain, your voice awakening me, with the eerie, painful cries that snuck out in the dark, from that secret, secure place you held them in the daylight, and even now I remember buying you 5-star brandy, and the Thanksgiving Mom Joanna you and I went rummaging through flea markets where you bought me a pink rhinestone pin for $2. Then, when we had dinner, I remember you had how you had too much wine, and when I think of how we all laughed together, I can feel your gentle tug. Then I remember you, so relaxed and smiling. I remember, too, how much I took you for granted. I remember my ears burning from listening while you recounted your days, and how many times I wasn't really listening at the other end because I'd thought I'd heard it all before and was young enough to believe I'd always remember it. Now this is all I can say of my thoughts. Right, so I think we've got a really interesting blending in this poem of right, these personal memories. I remember doing these things. I remember going to these places with you. I remember holding your hand, these different experiences, right? But then at the end, we have the introduction of generational memory, right? which is often passed down through storytelling, right? We learn about the experiences of our grandparents, for instance, when they tell us their stories. And it is one of the tragedies of the young, I suppose, that we don't listen and we don't commit to memory, but it's also part of being human, right? It is who we are as frail, imperfect beings with stupid monkey brains, right? But that sense of the sort of the failure of memory, the failure of generational memory, also becomes more significant in a cultural context, in which identity is erased, right? Whether that's for Indigenous people, where settler, colonial, and capitalist societies in Canada and the United States systematically attempt to erase Indigenous identities and to interpolate Indigenous people within settler, colonial, and capitalist cultures, or whether that's for, say, immigrant communities, right? Like, on my dad's side, my great-grandparents came over to the United States around 1900-ish. And they probably lived in Polish and Romanian Jewish communities. I know definitely they lived in Jewish communities when they first arrived, but as the generations have gone by, we have increasingly assimilated into mainstream American culture. And so we don't speak Yiddish anymore. We don't speak Polish or Romanian or whatever language it was that would have been the primary language of the home, right? So there is that loss of identity, and it's connected to the losses and limitations, the failures to remember generational memory, generational experience, etc., etc. And so we have all of those things. But that sense of the importance of generational memory does, of course, run through this poem, right? It is central to this poem, and it's sort of antidote to the dispossession that we saw in that first poem, Stray Bullet, Octa Revision, or Oka Revision. The last one I'm going to read you is another sort of model of resistance to this kind of loss, right? And it's a dream vision, which again is a very common poetic strategy for Indigenous people, and it is a way of preserving or reconnecting with Indigenous cultures. And this one specifically deals with Indigenous women's experience and the sort of struggles that often come for Indigenous women. So it's called Night Falling Woman. This is as it was meant to be, for if one footstep misplaced, I might have walked past someone at some other table, brushed against some other arm or knee, and found myself walking backwards at daybreak instead of counting the moons I found, when your hand touching my arm opened a hole in the sky, and I jumped or was pushed or was pulled, and I keep falling. Hummingbirds hovering turn translucent, bats diving, fireflies a token sign of life's lesser gods, lighting the trail of tears you once cried, for all the displaced people who came true in you, she who is born of many grandparents. Now Mackinac and Negic medicine I gift you, blue clay, sima cedar, sweet grass, and me, while Martin, bearing the weight of other beings, sleeps and dreams. Be still. In your arms the weary traveler finds shelter. By you the hungry are nourished, and though Dotem says we are not kin, we wander like sisters walking twin planets. Though you move as though music fires your soul, while I stumble graceless as a newborn doe struggling to her feet. But nothing in life is reasonable, not life itself, nor the trajectory of running that leads us home again. So who can say we don't share the same blood, or that you are not the child of a dream I imagined several lifetimes ago? Here time swallows its own tail, and our spirits laughing recall Shawnee chief and Muskokie leader fixing the morning star. Two horses breaking free, a battlefield of brilliant red berries returning, ever turning. Toward daybreak, waking two fireflies escaping, and it is here, and I know you beyond logic or a single lifetime, remembering with each falling star that moment your touch broke open the sky I fall into. So again, it's a dream poem. There's a sort of surrealist quality to this, but it's also about that sort of recovery of generational memory and that sense of continuity with past lives, which of course may be understood in a sort of direct literal sense of reincarnation, but also may be understood in a more figurative sense of I am the embodiment of my ancestors, and the truth of my being is the truth of their lives, their culture, the world of my ancestors, etc., etc. And again, it's explored in this figurative language, this dream-like language, etc., etc., which, again, is very common for Indigenous authors, because it connects to these sort of shamanistic traditions and things like this that help preserve the structures of many Indigenous cultures.